This is the OFN Today as we talk New England Patriots football. Can't wait to do that. First of all, let me introduce my co-host, Ryan Dunleavy from the New York Post. Ryan, how's everything going?
Good. Power's back, which is
Yeah,
good.
right?
Yeah.
We did our show on Friday, and just at the 30-minute mark, when we were about to do our sleepers, boom, power goes out, but at least it wasn't in the middle of the sleepers or a quarter in the sleep. It was just before we were about to do it. It was 30 minutes, so it actually worked out fine. We'll do our sleepers this Friday. So you have to take some good with the bad. Not that you care, because you had to deal with the electric being out all weekend.
Yeah, exactly. Just came back finally yesterday afternoon. So.
All right, now to talk New England Patriots football is Evan Lazar from CLNS Media. Am I getting it right, Evan?
You nailed it. Yes, all of it. My name, the company. I know it can be a mouthful.
Well, Evan, thanks. You did a great job talking the draft with us a few months ago. And did you think we'd be at this position right now as we're just a few weeks away from the beginning of the season? Hope.
Yeah, no, honestly, the way that the NFL was bringing it all together, we were definitely heading in a wrong direction there for a while with how slow this whole thing came together. I'm pretty optimistic, at least from the Patriots standpoint. They have 0 positive COVID tests right now, nobody on the COVID-19 list at all. So they're pretty healthy as a team in terms of COVID. But honestly, it really is going to come down to what happens when travel starts, right? The Patriots this year have a bunch of West Coast games. They got a game out in Seattle. They have 2 games out in Los Angeles within 5 days of each other, a Sunday game and then a Thursday nighter against the Chargers and the Rams later on in the season. So they're probably going to stay out on the West Coast maybe for that week and not come back east. So the question is when you get traveling, when you get into hotels, when you get into airplanes, when does that how do they contain the virus then? But right now, I think, we saw this kind of with Major League Baseball too, when everybody's in their own home camp, they can keep everybody safe. But then when you start crossing teams together, when does that point, can we keep everybody safe at that point?
Do the teams have their own charter? Have their own, they can just fly by
so
themselves?
The Patriots, yeah. So the Patriots have Aircraft 1 and Aircraft 2. They have 2 747s that Bob Kraft bought. I can't remember which airline sold them to him, but basically these giant planes that are no longer in use for commercial use, they sold them to the Patriots, who wanted them because they have much more cargo space for equipment and pads and things like that to bring on the road. So they have 2 identical planes. They both have 6 Super Bowl trophies on the wings.
Of course,
and they look very, very cool. They have the Patriot logo on them, and I saw one actually parked at Logan Airport at one point, and I was like, all right, this thing is pretty damn cool. So they have some cool planes, and that's the one benefit for the Patriots, I think, based off of other teams that are going to have to, use Delta or JetBlue or whoever they use typically to travel to games. The Patriots actually have their own planes that nobody else will step foot on besides the team and the traveling party.
Wow.
So they have a way of really bubbling the players. It's the other 31 teams I'm a little concerned about.
Are you surprised, Ryan, that the other teams haven't figured this out?
You see me nodding. I don't think most teams have that. No.
The Patriots are the only team, to my knowledge, that have their own planes.
What are they waiting for?
It's a big investment. It's a big investment.
Sure.
If you can just, if you can just charter a plane 8 times a year, 8 times a year, 10 times a year, whatever you need it for, playoff games. You can just charter a United plane 8 or 10 times a year. Buying your own plane seems like a big expense, but. This year, like Evan said, this year the Patriots had to look smart, as they always do.
Well, you got to win those Super Bowls first, right, before you can start investing in planes. Maybe that's
exactly.
What it is.
It's the plane that Bill Belichick and Tom Brady paid for being honest.
Absolutely. We're gonna go back and forth. A couple of quick questions, both ways between me and Ryan. Evan, I got one more to go before I switch it over to Ryan, and that is the obvious, and regarding COVID. And so many players leaving the Patriots compared to the rest of the NFL. What I'm hearing is, well, of course, that's because Brady's gone, and not only Brady is gone, but they don't want to go to camp with Belichick, and they've won their Super Bowls. And if they're going to skip a season, this is the perfect season to skip, Camp Belichick. And what do you believe on all of that, and whether or not it's just each individual person has their own personal story, and it's nothing more than that?
Well, I do really think that it's mostly the second part. Listen, I think we can get into the conspiracy theories about this team right now, when you look at it on paper, if we're being realistic, they obviously don't have as good of a chance as a Super Bowl as they would have had in the past and over the last 20 years or so. And the Vegas lines and all of the predictions can back that up, right? Without Brady, they're not the odds on favorite to win the Super Bowl really for the first time in probably 15, 20 years, right? Which is crazy. But I think the biggest thing is when you look at the individual case by case basis, Marcus Cannon, their starting right tackle who decided to opt out for the season. First of all, a cancer survivor, right? He survived cancer back in 2010. It's a big part of it. The second thing is that he was actually contemplating retirement anyways this offseason, and this kind of just pushed him a little bit further, and he decides to opt out and maybe revisit the whole thing next offseason. Dante Hightower, he has a newborn baby in his house. He also lives with his mother, who is elderly and is in that sort of, at-risk group there,
sure.
and has some pre-existing conditions as well that make her more at risk than a normal person would be of her age, and some medical conditions. Patrick Chung, similarly to Cannon, was considering retirement before all of this went down as well, and the Patriots incentivized him to come back by sweetening his deal a little bit, but then the COVID kind of protocols came out, and it just wasn't enough to convince Chung to pay one more year. So in certain instances, I can believe that people would see, no Brady. Belichick's camp is obviously not one of the easier camps in the NFL, but at the same time, I think that there are truly things that can explain this on a case-by-case basis as well.
It's just odd that there's so many on one team. I think some teams said 0, some teams said 1, 2. What was the Patriots' final number? 8?
It was 8. And, I think the one thing that I do want to say is that 4 of these players were probably going to get cut anyways.
Okay.
Right? So you got guys like Najee Toron and Marquise Lee, who has maybe had a chance of making the team if he could stay healthy, but odds are that he probably wasn't going to make the roster anyway. Matt Lacoste, the tight end last year, who was their starting tight end, they drafted 2 guys in the 3rd round to replace him in the draft in April. So a lot of these guys, I think, saw the writing on the wall as well. And it's really that big 4 and really a big 3, but I'll include Brandon Bolden in there as well because he's been such a valuable asset to them on special teams. But it's really Dante Hightower, Patrick Chung, and Marcus Cannon. And the other 5 are sort of guys that I think that they can easily replace.
Were you surprised at some of the guys who opted in? I know that both the McCourties, who I know very well from having covered them in college, were considering opting out. Were certainly admitted to being nervous about it. And then the Patriots have a lineman too, right?
David Andrews, yeah. David Andrews had blood clots in his lungs last year. I think for Andrews, I'll answer that one first, is that he lost a year already from the blood clots. That was kind of taken away from him from a non-football injury. And I think that he's just clamoring to get back out there. And as long as he was medically cleared, he was going to play because he really missed football last year. And I think for the McCourties, I really feel for Devin in particular because I think that he wanted to opt out. I think in his heart of hearts, he would rather not play this year. But because of what's going on off the field with all the racial injustice things and things that he's trying to push in terms of his platform, he knows that the biggest platform he could possibly have is a Sunday at 1:00. And if he goes ahead and he opts out, then he sort of fades into the background a little bit, and he doesn't have this really useful platform for the movement, is what he said, right? So I think that this for Devin is mostly about staying focused with his work off the field and using his platform on the field to kind of promote racial inequality and certain things that he's trying to push there with all the things that are going on in the country. So he really felt like from a medical standpoint, from a family standpoint, opting out was the best case. And he also has said that he doesn't really care about the opt-out date. If he decides a month from now, 2 months from now that it's not safe anymore, he has no problems forfeiting the rest of his contract and sitting out the rest of the year. But I think the biggest thing is that he wants to be able to use that platform. So I would be shocked if Devin McCourty is, just kind of silent during the anthem, silent during all these games. He's going to have some sort of protest that he's going to use his platform for at nationally televised games, and stuff like that. So for the McCourtys, I think it really came down to continuing to promote the movement and continue to promote Black Lives Matter and all that kind of stuff. And, not necessarily about them actually wanting to play football, but at the end of the day, they, you see them out there practicing some of the videos the Patriots have released and pictures, and they're all smiles like they usually are out on the football field. So they're having a good time anyways.
Man, they both have young kids, and obviously Devin had an off-season tragedy in his family, so lost a child, so lost a pregnancy. So obviously a very, very, I know it weighed on those two guys enormously, and two of the most socially aware guys probably in the league too.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's honestly it's very cool to cover Devin because he's such a just intelligent person and really a guy that really gets it and is using his platform for all the right reasons. And to see him, he had his media availability for the first time last week as part of the returning captain's media availability. He said, "I'm not taking any questions," and then he went on a 7-minute, basically a 7-minute, call to action essentially, where he just sounded off about everything from racial injustice to the opt-out rules and the protocols the NFL are using against the players. And he basically went on a rant of sorts for about 6 or 7 minutes.
You don't get a lot in Patriots land.
No, and it was honest and it was upfront and it was spectacular, honestly, and it was really cool to hear him say those things, and it really made it clear to us that he doesn't really feel like football is the number one thing right now that we should be concerned about, but he's playing to make sure that we know that we shouldn't be concerned about football right now.
Now it's interesting because that
Greg, let me ask one more. My Rutgers fans don't kill me. Devin McCourty going to be in the Patriots Ring of Honor or whatever they call it one day? And do you think he's a Hall of Famer? Having covered it day in and day out.
So the Patriots have the Patriots Hall of Fame, and they opened the Patriots Hall of Fame because over the last 20 years, they've got so many decorated guys that to retire every single number in a football team is not going to be possible. So 12 will go up there at some point, obviously, in the retired numbers section of the stadium. I don't think 32 will necessarily make it up there, but he'll definitely get into the Patriots Hall of Fame, which is where guys like, Willie McGinnis and Teddy Bruschi and Troy Brown and all those guys are up there. So that's where he'll kind of get that honor. In terms of the gold jacket and the real Hall of Fame, I mean, I know I'm a little bit biased, but it's tough to make a better resume for a guy that's not necessarily loaded with stats in terms of interceptions, right? He's not Ed Reed. We get that, right? But he is, for the last 10 years, been, if not a top 5 safety in the league, maybe even a top 3 safety in the league at times. And he's done that consistently year in and year out. And then on top of that, he's a captain of the team. He's been a captain since his second year on the team. This is a guy that walked into the building and owned the locker room as a rookie and as a second-year player. And he's won 3 Super Bowls. So it's really tough to get a better resume than that if you're not going to just pad it with stats like your Ed Reed or Troy Polamalu or somebody like that.
All pro at 2 positions, corner and safety. It's just like him, Rod Woodson, and somebody else, 3 guys I think have that on.
Yeah, if they had left him at corner, he probably would have been a really good corner for 10 years also, but Belichick is really big on controlling the middle of the field, and he knew how good Devin would be at kind of controlling and patrolling the back end for them, and that's exactly what he's done.
Devin will need a few other reasons to get into the Hall other than that dual all-pro status, because it did nothing or has done nothing for Joe Klecko so far, which is a travesty, because the guy should be in the Hall of Fame. But that's my jet input.
I agree completely on that.
Yeah. I was gonna say regarding McCourty, Evan, I wonder how Bill feels about. It's not as important to play football as it is what's really going on with my social issues and things of that nature. Now, if this would have been a rookie or a first or a second year Devin, okay, maybe there would be a little friction there. But I got to imagine, Devin is right now where he is with the team and his stature, that Bill will he'll know that when the time comes, this guy will be there for us. But still, it's an interesting way that I'm sure Bill doesn't want that kind of spreading into the locker room. He wants his football team believing that football should always be first.
Right. It's crazy because this is a very weird year, obviously, for many reasons. But at the end of the day, I think even Belichick realizes maybe not the social justice issues for Belichick exactly, but they need to keep everybody healthy from a COVID perspective too. So he actually came out and said, in his presser that the number one thing is keeping everybody safe and healthy with COVID, because we won't have a season if we have a breakout in our team with the coronavirus. So that's a big weighing on Belichick's mind. I think he understands where Devin's coming from with the social justice issues. Like you said, at the end of the day, as long as Devin's preparing during the week, practicing hard in the film room, studying the play playbook, studying the game plan, and then showing up on game day and playing like Devin McCourty, they won't have any problems. But like any other player, when you start playing a little bit lesser than your usual standard, Belichick will have something to say about that. And we know that he's not shy to let it fly, especially, for some of the leaders of the team. He kind of uses those guys as examples sometimes in some of the bigger meetings to say, Tom Brady, the famous line is, oh, I could get somebody from Foxborough High to make that pass, right? And that's what the type of things that Belichick would say to Brady to kind of put Brady in his place in front of everybody to see, not even Tom Brady, the greatest quarterback of all time, is above criticism from me. And I think that that's a similar thing with Devin or, Stephon Gilmore or Julian Edelman, or whoever it might be. So if it comes a time where football is Devin's not really doing his normal thing on the field, then I'm sure he'll hear about it. And I don't think that that's a major concern.
All right, let's go with the big topic that's going to, I'm sure, take up a lot of your time between now and week 1, and that is the quarterback position with Cam Newton. So this is Cam Newton's job to lose, isn't it?
It's got to be, and we had spoke to offensive coordinator Josh McDaniels on last Friday, and that was probably one of the most telling press conferences we've ever had with McDaniels, because we've never had to talk to him about a quarterback competition. So it's never had presented an opportunity for us to really dig into what does he look for in a quarterback, and what does this team look for in a quarterback, because it's always been the same guy for the past 20 years. And I think the biggest thing is with Josh McDaniels, what he said 2 things that were really key. The first thing is that he's really impressed with Cam's just mental ability from just a natural football player standpoint. We're not talking about necessarily learning the specific Patriots playbook or the schemes that they're going to be running in their system, but more so just his natural feel for the game and the fact that he can just kind of step on a football field and start making plays instantly. Yep. And that was something that a lot of people have compared to like Randy Moss when the Patriots acquired him in 2007, was that not necessarily that he came in and knew the playbook inside and out right away, but he had such a just great natural feel for the game that he just stepped onto the field and was a playmaker from the get-go. And I think that they do see that a little bit with Cam, that he just has a great instinctual kind of level of play for him. And I think that that's really good. I also think that McDaniels talked pretty in depth about adding a running quarterback element to the offense. So it's obviously been on his mind, thinking about ways to use Cam's legs and build that into his scheme as well. Something that he clearly hasn't really done a whole lot of. Now, he did kind of talk about how in 2008 they had Matt Castle and they sort of had to switch the system a little bit to fit and adapt the system to Matt Castle from Brady. And then obviously McDaniels was away for 3 years from New England with the Rams and with the Broncos. So he has some experience with guys like Tim Tebow as well to kind of get this offense into more of a mobile quarterback mode. So listening to all that, yes, the questions certainly pointed him in that direction. So that was a little bit of it, is us asking specifically about how he was going to adapt to Cam and all these types of things. But he really was glowing about how Cam has sort of absorbed the information they've given him so far. And it does sound like they realize from a schematic standpoint that he presents them the best chance to win right now.
Tell me about the pulse of the fan base, Evan. Like, Brady leaves, and it looks for 3 months like Jarrett Stidham's going to be the quarterback. Did the Patriots fans say, doesn't really matter, we're still going to win the AFC East, we could have Evan at quarterback and we're still going to win, it really doesn't matter who our quarterback is? Were they depressed, like, oh my God, we're going from Brady to this guy? And then what did Cam Newton do? Like, did he keep did he rejuvenate them further? Did he wake up fans who were depressed? Like, take me through the Brady leaves to Newton now, the fan base's reaction to the quarterback.
Well, I would say when Brady been for a pretty long time, and not even depression, I would say anger, right? Because how can you let him walk, right? Like, how can you let that happen? How can you let the greatest quarterback of all time, the icon of your franchise, sign with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers of all teams, right? It's not like he went and went out there to the Dallas Cowboys or, some great franchise, Green Bay or something like that. They lost him to Tampa Bay, which just seems crazy. And I don't think anybody would have believed it. When I first caught wind of maybe Brady signing there early March, late February, around there when that buzz started, Tampa's for real, I was like, he's not going to sign with Tampa. That's crazy, right? And lo and behold, here we are. So I think that at first it was anger. How do you let this happen, right? Then there was definitely a big push to kind of believe in Jarrett Stidham. And internally, they were definitely leaking to a lot of us, pump up Stidham, pump up Stidham. We really believe in this guy. Uh-huh. We really think that he can play, right? And it had similar vibes, I would say, to the Jimmy Garoppolo vibes vibes that we got back in 2014, 2015, 2016, around then, when people were saying, they got this other guy, Jimmy, behind Brady that can really play, and at some point he's going to get a chance. And I think that's sort of what we're hearing with Stidham. And then I think sort of reality set in for a lot of people where they realized, okay, with Stidham at quarterback, what can we realistically expect? And then on top of that, you look at the offensive personnel around Stidham, and they haven't done a whole lot to upgrade. They did draft the 2 tight ends in the 3rd round. N'Keal Harry, they're hopeful, is going to have a breakout second season after really struggling as a rookie. But for the most part, it's pretty much the same personnel that they're bringing back from last year. And we saw that Brady struggled with that group. So how can we expect Jared Stidham to be any better? So then there was some reality, and then Cam signed, and then it was euphoria, right?
Yeah, right.
Now everybody is pumped. Everybody's excited. We got a former MVP. We got a guy that can run. I think that's a big part of it too, is that, we know we're not going to get Brady 2.0, right? That guy doesn't probably exist, from a skill standpoint and from just a mental kind of work ethic standpoint either. You're never going to recreate that. So getting a guy like Cam, who's a completely different quarterback that wins in a completely different way from Brady, I think that's enticing for people just to see this offense look different and adapt and be something else for a change, and have a guy that can really affect the game with his legs. So I think that we're sort of in the middle now, because a lot of fans were so attached to Stidham early on when they lost Brady and before they signed Cam, that they don't want to back off that ledge sort of with Stidham. So a lot of fans are still on Jared Stidham's side and still are rooting for him to win this job. But ultimately, I think everybody is aware that if Cam's healthy, if Cam's Cam Newton, then he's definitely the best chance that they have to win as many football games as possible.
Do you think he'll mesh with Belichick off the field? Like, obviously, we know Belichick and McDaniels are the masters of creating an offense. They're going to figure out what Cam does well, and they'll probably start 1-2 and win 9 straight after they figure it out. How about off the field? Because we've seen big personalities like Randy Moss come in and like kind of assimilate to the Patriots way. Obviously, that probably would have happened with Antonio Brown if he wasn't charged off the field with stuff like, accused of stuff off the field, excuse me. We've seen big personalities go and mold to the Patriots way. Cam's got those flashy clothes, and, he's outspoken, and he says some things that, you don't usually hear coming out of New England. Will he just kind of become a Patriots robot, or will Belichick have to accept this guy's a little different? He's not going to be Tom Brady at the microphone.
Well, I do think they have to accept that there is differences in personalities here. And I think the one thing that you saw with Brady, and Tom Curran of NBC Sports Boston wrote this, and that is he was a chameleon, right? One second he was, superstar Brady. The next second he was just another guy. He was always adapting himself to kind of fit the moment and fit what the team needed at that time and place. But the one thing about Brady was that last year there was certainly a lot of pouting from Brady. Let's not mistake it. He was definitely up there at these press conferences and making it clear that he was unhappy with how the offense was playing, unhappy with the guys he was throwing to outside of Julian Edelman and James White. And I think that it definitely reverberated around the locker room that Brady was not himself last year for most of the year. So I think that there is some sort of emotional kind of layover from that the Patriots are not necessarily immune to, kind of having those types of ups and downs and roller coasters of a season. I think with Cam, the biggest thing is that he's got a giant chip on his shoulder now. And I think in terms of having thick skin and being able to kind of take Belichick's criticism, maybe he doesn't get enough credit, I don't think, for being able to handle those types of things. Because down in Carolina, he was really picked and prodded by the media down there for his clothes, for his work ethic, for not diving on the ball in the Super Bowl, all the things that kind of went wrong down there at times. And the media really let him have it. The question is internally, how did the coaching staff, kind of approach coaching him? And I think that that's sort of something that Belichick has done in the past that people also don't give him credit for is, Rodney Harrison, Corey Dillon, Randy Moss. These guys are different cats. All these guys aren't Tom Brady, right? They're not going to let you berate them in front of the entire team. So I think that Belichick has adapted a little bit more than he gets credit for to certain personalities. And we can even go all the way back to the 80s and talk about Lawrence Taylor. That guy was certainly not somebody that was, very, okay with criticism and definitely had to evolve his coaching style a little bit to fit LT also. So he's pretty accustomed to doing that with certain players. Obviously not at the quarterback position, which does change it just a little bit, but I think that they'll mesh pretty well. And, winning cures all, right? As long as they're winning and producing on the field, and I think that Belichick will let him say whatever he wants. In his press conference, his introductory press conference on Friday, he was already deflecting questions like he, is pro Belichick already. I asked him how the Patriots offense meshed with the Carolina offense. Was it similar at all? And I got I can't tell you that answer. So he's already been schooled. He's already been coached up on how to handle the media. So I'm not surprised that he's already kind of giving short answers, but he was very relaxed. I'm very excited to be here. So I think that there is going to be a little bit of a meeting in the middle there.
All right, I got a kind of like a two-parter regarding Newton in the offense, Evan. Who benefits specifically the most? Those players, especially a lot of the ones that Tom wasn't happy with last year. So who benefits the most with Cam Newton coming in personnel-wise? And tell me about those players specifically. And do you have like one or two players? And Harry is probably the obvious one. Okay, yeah, he could probably take the next step because he was a first rounder. But give me another player. I mean, I'm intrigued by Bird, but give me another player that you think might also have to be called upon and be the new guy that really takes on a big role for New England, other than the obvious ones.
Yeah, N'Keal, I think, really does have a great chance to have a breakout year just because Cam has worked with big-bodied receivers in the past and successfully. Guys like Kelvin Benjamin and Devin Funches have really kind of thrived. And also with Cam, you're hopefully not going to see as much press man as the Patriots saw with Brady. Every team with Brady, it was rush 4, drop 7 into coverage, get into the receiver's face, disrupt the timing of the offense, throw off the rhythm of the Patriots offense. And that's how you beat them, right? Now with Cam, you have to worry about the legs aspect. So you can't turn your back all the time and run man to man all across the board. So a guy like N'Keal, who struggles to get off press man coverage a little bit at the line of scrimmage, I think he's really going to benefit from facing a lot more zone coverage where he can just run into space and be an athlete, right? Just run into space, find a pocket, catch the ball, create after the catch, right? And I think that's a lot more what he did in college and why he was so successful with the ball in his hands in college. Now, outside of N'Keal, the guy that I really think is going to benefit a lot from this is Damian Harris, second-year running back out of Alabama, who they picked in the 3rd round. Sony Michel is on the PUP list right now with a foot issue. He might stay on PUP for a little while. He had off-season surgery to repair a broken bone in his foot, and it's not looking too good for him right now to make the week 1, to be active for week 1. Harris is a guy that at Alabama worked with Jalen Hurts, worked with Tua, obviously, and a lot of zone read type of concepts. A lot of plays where RPO, zone read, things that the Patriots are going to run with Cam, hopefully, I hope at least. And if you have that sort of element and you have that quarterback that can run the ball, we know if he's holding the backside of the defense because they have to respect the quarterback keeper, that's going to open up the rushing lanes between the tackles for the back. So whether it's Damian Harris, Sony Michel, James White, Rex Burkhead, whoever ends up getting those carries or however they end up distributing those carries, the running game is going to have to pace the Patriots a little bit this year, similarly to like what we saw with Lamar Jackson last year in Baltimore, or the Dak Prescott and the Zeke Elliott Cowboys. They're going to have to be a team that runs the ball effectively if they want to win games and want to stay in games. So I think that that's going to be a big part of it, is those backs. Now they have this sort of thing where they can kind of create more space for them in between the tackles with Cam, whereas with Brady they were always a man short, right? Because they didn't have the quarterback holding a defender, they didn't have to account for the quarterback. So the Patriots are running against a lot of stacked boxes. Almost 40% of their runs last year were against 8 or more guys in the box because nobody cared about the guys on the outside because they had nobody on the outside, and it's Brady under center who is a pocket quarterback. So now hopefully it opens up the running game a little bit more because the Patriots desperately need it.
And it's going to be interesting too because there's limited amount of time to see what's going on in practice. There's no preseason games, even though you don't show it, but still, it should be interesting when week 1 happens, if it happens, exactly what the Patriots are going to look like. And who are they playing that week, the first week?
They play Miami the first week, and I think the biggest thing is, Belichick and McDaniels have both said that they're not changing the system. They're not reinventing the system. They're adapting the system. So early on, the quarterback competition is really going to come down to who can run the basic concepts of the Patriots offense the best, right? The core concepts that we have used to seeing over the last 20 years. Then once we get into game planning, once we get into preparing for an actual game, is when the adaptations will come. That's when we'll start to see the mobile quarterback element if it's Cam, or if it's Stidham. I think we might see a heavy dosage of sort of 49ers type schemes, heavy outside zone with hard play action on bootlegs and coming back in the other direction to kind of change the launch angle and kind of force the defense to play sideline to sideline a little bit against Stidham to open up the field and make for easier reads for a younger quarterback. So it's going to be a lot less, 3 wide, standing at the line of scrimmage, Brady pointing here, Brady pointing there, making checks and audibles at the line of scrimmage. They're going to have to really run the offense in a way that is going to adapt to whoever is under center and realize that it's not Tom Brady. So McDaniel specifically said, we have to realize that things that we did in the past that we were really good at, maybe we're not really good at those things anymore because we don't have 12 under center, and it's really going to become a totally different offense. I think by the time, October, Halloween comes around, you'll see really a different offense completely.
All right. Well, again, that Miami game, they're the team that's going to have to deal with New England and what they're going to see for the first time the hardest. It's going to be the rest of whoever else is on New England's schedule will probably benefit from that. But still, it should be quite interesting, and we'll have more than enough time to talk to you before then, hopefully one more time before the season begins. But I do have one last question, and then I'll let Ryan wrap up with you, and that is the offensive line. Who is the starting right tackle week 1? And it will be interesting to find out how good these linemen truly are, because great quarterbacks make offensive linemen look really good sometimes. Now we're going to find out how good these guys really are. But most of all, starting right tackle, that's got to be the big question in camp on the offensive line, right?
It is, and they really don't have an experienced backup there. Yadni Kajusa, they drafted in the 3rd round out of West Virginia in 2019, is the early favorite. He's kind of got the inside track right now. He's a really high-level pass protector, strong guy, strong in the upper body, good hands. He can do all the things that you want your tackles to do, from a tool standpoint, but he really doesn't have a ton of experience, and he sat out his entire rookie year with a quad injury, basically a red shirt his rookie season, and hasn't even put on the pads yet for an NFL practice. So it's going to be really interesting to see how quickly he can adapt and overcome that. And on top of that, just from a personnel standpoint, Dante Scarnecchia retired this offseason for a second time. So he's no longer in the building. And I can't really, explain or put into words how impactful that is really for the Patriots from every walk of offense, from developing players, game planning, in-game adjustments, scheming, and coming up with this new rushing attack that they're probably going to come up with Cam. Scarnecchia had his hand in all of it. He was a big part of designing that running game. He was a big part of their in-game adjustments too. So that's a massive loss for them, and to kind of now have to, especially to replace a right tackle, that's even a bigger kind of thing. Corey Cunningham's another name that you can look out for. They traded for him last offseason, right at the end, right before roster cutdowns and before week 1. They traded with him for Arizona for a 6th-round pick, and he's a very athletic guy, tackle, converted tight end to tackle in college, and definitely has the athleticism to play the position, but body control and sort of technique is a big concern for him and something that he's been working on. So it's going to be between those two guys, I would think, or somebody outside the organization. Maybe they sign a free agent, or they pull off a trade for a more veteran player at that spot. But I would say it comes down to those guys, and that interior 3, and then Isaiah Wynn at left tackle, I think, has a chance to make that leap. But that interior 3 is really solid. I think the Patriots will be able to lean on that. Tooney, Andrews, Mason, that's as good of an interior 3 as you're going to find in the league. So I'm really looking forward to seeing those 3 guys lead this rushing attack, and see Cam running QB power right behind Shaq Mason. I think is going to be a lot of fun.
Okay.
Give me last thing from me is just give me some names on the defense, right? Besides our McCourty love fest.
Yes.
We mentioned Hightower opted out, Chung opted out, but that was after Deron Harmon got traded, Danny Shelton's gone, Kyle Van Noy's gone. If you only watch the Patriots 2 or 3 times a year, the 7 defensive players only McCourty's back. So who else is going to make plays for this defense?
Right. I mean, they still have Stephon Gilmore, too, obviously, and J.C. Jackson, who is their other corner on the outside, and John Jones, their slot corner. Those guys, basically the back-end secondary is still intact outside of Harmon. The issue is the front 7, and that's where Patrick Chung was really a front 7 player in the modern NFL, as that kind of that money backer. So it's really the front 7 guys or the front 8 that they're really kind of rebuilding completely here. I think at linebacker, the spots that you can look at are these first and second year players, Chase Winovich, Josh Uche, and Freddie Jennings, who they've drafted in each of the last 2 drafts on day 2. They're really high on all 3 of those guys. Uche and Winovich in particular are very athletic players. They run sideline to sideline. Their motor runs hot all game long. And they also have some pretty good versatility with Uche to play him on the line or off the line or in line, which is what we see with the Patriots all the time, moving those linebackers around like chess pieces to get them free in the pass rush. I'm sure they'll do that a lot with Uche. Jennings is more of kind of that fundamental end of the line player, kind of like a Van Noy. He's just very solid in that role for Alabama over the last couple of years. So they're hoping that, with the Saban familiarity, with the playbook being somewhat similar down at Alabama and their defense, that the transition will be pretty easy for Jennings, and hopefully he can come in and make an impact as a rookie as well. In terms of replacing Chung, Kyle Duggar, they drafted him in the 2nd round. He is a rocked up athlete, 99th percentile tester, has all the tools, right? But he was at a D2 school in Lionel Ryan. He's got a big kind of transition ahead of him to jump up to the NFL from that D2 level. So we'll see how quickly he can do that. But they do have veterans like Adrian Phillips, who they signed in free agency from the Chargers. Terrence Brooks, who was with the Jets at some point. He's now with the Patriots. Those 2 guys are sort of those box linebacker safety types that can play, guard tight end, guard running backs out of the backfield, do that type of thing. And I think they're pretty optimistic that they can replace Chung with a couple of different guys like Phillips, like Duggar, like Brooks, and kind of make one Patrick Chung out of 2 or 3 different people. The guy they're really going to lose and feel is Hightower, because they don't have another guy in the front 7 who's that blue chipper that teams are circling on Mondays and being like, how are we going to block this guy? Both in the run game and as a pass rusher. So that's going to be the question, is where does that production get replaced? Is it the rookies? Is it Jennings? Is it Uche? Some experienced guys like John Simon and Brandon Copeland will probably have a chance to play those roles as well. But Hightower was really the impactful guy. He's the guy that on Sundays was making those splash plays at and behind the line of scrimmage. How do they replace that? I think it's going to be a big question. This is one of the biggest overhauls we've seen on defense in the last 20 years. The Patriots lost a ton of production from last year to this year in terms of sacks, tackles for loss, plays in the running game. So that's going to be the biggest question mark, is how do they replace all of that? Because turnover regression is coming for this defense. They're not going to pick off 25 passes again, most likely, and they're probably not going to return 6 of them for touchdowns, including punts and punt blocks and stuff like that too in there, and special teams. So they're not going to get all that scoring production from their defense and kicking game again, most likely, unless Belichick is just a wizard and they somehow figure out how to do it all over again. But that's going to be the biggest question. Could be. That's the biggest question, is can they do that again, right? Can they replicate it? We've seen teams like the Chicago Bears, for instance, where one year their defense is red hot and the next year it really regressed. The Patriots need to avoid that, because if this defense isn't a top 3, top 2, top 1 unit, this team is not going to win 10 or 11 games. It's probably going to win 6 or 7.
And let's not forget the loss of Judge to your Giants, Ryan.
Yeah, that too. Well, I think with Joe Judge, he last year, it was kind of an undertold story that he was juggling 2 positions, right? He was coaching special teams and he was coaching wide receivers. And the Patriots wide receivers, as you know, were a disaster last year. I think that the biggest thing is that he was trying to coach 2 different spots at the same time, which is impossible, right? And the Patriots did it because they wanted to puff up his resume. It ended up working out for him. He ends up getting a head coaching job. So I think the biggest thing with Judge is that they really do have to replace him on special teams more so than wide receivers. And we'll see where they can kind of Cam McCord is a good, special teams assistant for him over the years. So maybe he, can kind of take those reins and have an easy transition. But they will misjudge a little bit, I think, because he's one of those guys we were talking about before who just knows football, right? He just knows the game inside and out from any position, from any sort of perspective, offense, defense, special teams, wide receivers, quarterbacks, offensive line. He really does know the team inside and out. And, those types of guys are hard to replace.
Evan, great job as always. And if we don't get a chance to talk to you before the season begins, definitely going to try to mark that first week after game 1, because that might even be a better time to talk to you after we get some game film and we could find out how this Patriot team looks post Tom Brady. And CLNS Media, tell me a little bit about what you got going on there, and also you have your All Pats 22 podcast, right?
Correct. So CLNS Media, we have our YouTube page, just Patriots Press Pass, or just CLNS Media, where we do daily videos updating you guys on Patriots news, and I give my takes about the team and the roster and all that kind of stuff as well on there. And then I write on clnsmedia.com, where you can find a training camp preview. I'm going position by position right now, breaking down the roster and dissecting what they have at each spot. And then we'll have the season here shortly, hopefully, fingers crossed, and we'll be wall-to-wall coverage during the year. So Patriots Press Pass on YouTube, clnsmedia.com for the website, Patriots All 22 for my podcast, where we break down the All 22, believe it or not. And then that's basically where we go from there. But I'm just praying that we can get through this year, and I'm sure you guys are doing the same.
Yes, absolutely. Evan, great job. We'll talk to you again, hopefully in the next month.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Take care. All right, Ryan. I tell you what. Let's close out here, and Ryan, you could go ahead and X out, and we'll let you go. Ryan, we're going to talk to you on Wednesday. Ryan Talbot, Buffalo Bills Talk.
Sounds good to me.
And then Friday we have our weekly Friday show, so looking forward to that. And I'm also trying to get an interview with Elaine Poupart, who covers the Dolphins. So I'm trying to see if I can get him on either Tuesday or Thursday. I figured why not, since we have the Bills and the Patriots this week. Yeah.
Yep.
And then let's hope that when we talk on Wednesday or Friday that we'll still have a college football season.
Yeah, I don't know if we will. I'm not so sure about that. Maybe Wednesday we will.
All right. Thanks a lot, Ryan. I appreciate it. As usual, talk to you on Wednesday.